Hey, how you going? I don't like when reviews are heavily focused on comparisons to other games, but this is a remake, so it's gonna happen. The game I'll be referencing is, of course, Digimon World for the PlayStation 1, and I've previously covered that in a review, so go check that out before you watch this. Please and thank you. Before I get into it, I want to say that Digitize came so close to being the ideal and logical expansion of the original Digimon World. Were it not for one major issue, it would be a near-perfect remake, but we'll get to that in a moment. Digitize opens similarly to the original game, where a young lad returns to his house in a busy Chinese city and, with a complete lack of parental supervision, gets sucked into the digital world. The developers were clearly set on selling the authenticity of the remake and wanted to showcase how true it is to the source material. It starts off by handing you an Agumon and thrusts you into battle against a crazed Gabumon, the two possible starters from the original. The battle system looks and feels almost exactly like the first game, with a snazzy user interface update and vastly better AI. After a brief spiel with Digimon, you return to combat Gabumon once more. Upon his defeat, he joins the city and opens a storage warehouse, which is available to the protagonist. Much like the first game, a bunch of Digimon fucked off and you have to deal with returning them to the city while trying to find a way back to the real world. This is, unfortunately, where the aforementioned major issue pops up. In the original game, recruiting Digimon would often see new buildings pop up in town, or new and expanded services become available to the player. There was only a handful of recruits that didn't actually do anything, and it was incredibly rewarding to have this visual representation of your progress. It made you feel like your actions really mattered, and that you were achieving something amidst the perpetual cycle of death and eternal shitting. Digitize came into the boardroom, flopped its cock on the table and said, "Who the fuck needs this spectacular function?" It scrapped it almost entirely in favour of a static city that never really changes. Sure, the city does become noticeably more populated as you progress, but the state you see it in at the start of the game will ultimately be the state it's in at the end. It's certainly not a deal breaker, but it is incredibly disappointing, and after recruiting most of the Digimon, it left me asking, why bother? I understand that space would be a huge constraint since the UMDs are only 1.4 gig and storing multiple versions of the same map would take up quite a lot of space, but it's still really defeating. Luckily for us, this huge negative is made up for in other ways. The monsters that you recruit, while having no impact on the structure of the city, still offer various services. If you're an old world gangster like me, you'll be pleased to know that a lot of Digimon reprise previous roles. Palmon buffs up the Digifarm to supply bigger meat, Meramon opens a restaurant, and Birdramon offers a fast travel service. It's a nice little nod for older fans and taps into that delicious nostalgia vein without being consumed by it. On top of providing services, gifts can also be acquired from newly found residents. These consist of general items, cards, or accessories. Items are self-explanatory and cards are pointless collectibles, but the accessories are vanity items that can be equipped to give your companion a unique appearance. While it occasionally feels like I accidentally opened DeviantArt, the fact that I can make my Digimon look different to all the others adds to the fact that he's my Digimon. This might seem like a really minor thing, but in a game that's half caring for a seemingly living creature, it's a spectacular addition. Oragonal character Donut Steel. This time around, the maps have shifted from random perspectives of pre-rendered backgrounds and moved more towards standard 3D design, with a third-person camera sitting firmly up yourself. There's nothing that really stands out about them, and most maps boil down to a series of interconnecting hallways, sans 2 or 3, that are a bit more open. It's not to say that hallways are bad, but the layout is so uninspired, and most of the themes are the same you see in every other game. Just to name a few off the top of my head, there's plains, forest, swamp, sewer, tundra, desert, and castle, which are, for the most part, a standard affair. However, there are a few levels worthy of praise for being genuinely interesting. First of all, we have this water level called Submerged Ruins. The connecting area is a beach that transitions into a seemingly shallow puddle, but in the next map, if we look down, we see giant man-made structures below the surface. At first, I thought this was just a reflection, but you can clearly see the tops of buildings beneath you. The second is a canyon, which looks like a dilapidated Vegas sank into the earth. It alludes to a destroyed city as it's arid and empty. If nothing else, it makes you stop and ponder the circumstances that led to the canyon existing in this form. Then, finally, we have the volcano. It's red hot, and the parts consist of a series of metallic walkways resting above a bed of lava. Apparently, volcano can't melt steel memes. Cool. Upon closer inspection, there are warning signs everywhere, and it appears to be some sort of factory, but it's never explained, which makes it all the more interesting. Much like Digimon World 1 and 3, the environments still incorporate a bunch of man-made oddities sprinkled among the nature setting. It's nice to see that distinct style return, as it's an incredibly important part of what makes a Digimon game feel like a Digimon game. In certain maps, invisible walls can be quite intrusive. They only pop up in a few of the earlier maps, like the plains, but nothing takes you out of an experience more than invisible fucking walls. While the maps are quite hit and miss, the fact that the design is much more conventional means that a lot of the mystery and intrigue that the original was oozing with is just gone. It was a worthy sacrifice, as it's no longer a pain in the ass to move around anymore, but I do long for that cryptic feeling. The camera sits a bit close to the protagonist and can be an issue when changing direction in tight spaces or when wall hugging. It's not something you'll encounter a lot, and it functions well for the most part. However, it does this strange thing where it'll automatically swap shoulders based on which direction you're pressing. I found it to be really disorienting, and with no option to disable it, actively tried to avoid it throughout the entire game. Digimon caring returns in a big way, and it's nowhere near as tedious this time. Whenever your buddy needs a bit of maintenance, the alert pops up immediately and it's incredibly hard to miss. The time to respond to these alerts has also been drastically increased, to the point where it removes most of the challenge of juggling two clashing playstyles. I can confidently say you'll probably never miss a toilet trip in Digitize, as you're given 3 hours to find the nearest squat spot. I think it's a bit too lenient. Even newcomers to the series won't have any trouble avoiding care mistakes, and while it does put a smaller focus on the tedious parts of caring, it could still use a bit more tweaking. That said, it's still leaps and bounds ahead of the original. A minor gripe I have with catering to a Digimon's needs is that the eating and pooping animations have been completely removed. When you feed a partner, you throw the food into the top of their head, and there's no chewing animation to be seen. Where Digimon used to walk to a toilet, squat, make a grunt noise, and visibly use the bathroom, we instead get this lovely shudder animation. It removes a lot of the charm the original had and feels less like you're caring for a living thing and more like you're filling a checkbox. It does save time, but it also feels like something's missing. Training is nowhere near as tedious anymore, but the wear still shows towards the end of the game. The special training is now a short, interactive minigame that gives extra gains upon successful completion. It's much better than the slot machines of old, and the risk versus reward element keeps it engaging, as failure grants almost no increase in stats and still consumes 1 full hour. If you fuck up more than a few times, you can hinder a Digimon's overall growth and Digivolution possibilities. While we're on the topic of Digivolution, for some reason, and I'm not sure why, the developers thought it a good idea to lock certain megaforms behind side quests. I had an ultimate Digimon who more than met the requirements to jump to the next level, but it never happened as I had yet to complete one specific event. This is counterintuitive to Digimon progression. I trained that fucker for hours to get him in peak physical condition, but he didn't evolve because I hadn't battled one specific character yet. That's fucking retarded. To secure those top tier Digimon, in addition to unlocking them, you'll need to engage in quite a few battles, which is what the training builds to. Combat is where I think Digitize has improved the most over the former game. Stat gains from battles are larger, so they serve more of a purpose, and while there's certainly no replacement for training, this makes them more than minor annoyances. The AI has been fixed, and now Digimon actually engage like they're in a fight, and not in a kindergarten performance of Digimon the movie. Battles are also a lot less subject to RNG. They function more or less the same as the first game, but the combatants seem a lot more responsive to commands. With a high enough brain stat, you'll be given access to very specific abilities, such as Defend and Move. Move grants the ability to designate a spot for a Digimon to walk to, which comes into play with Area of Effect abilities, while a well-timed defend can mean the difference between a victory and a loss. The hitboxes can be a bit off at times, but it usually works in your favour, so whatever. I won't go over the story too much, because it mostly consists of generic crap about the power of friendship and all that fucking Yu-Gi-Oh nonsense. Look, Japan, nobody who has ever experienced friendship speaks highly of it. It's genuinely not worth covering, and it certainly doesn't make up for the lack of town expanse. However, at a certain point, you're granted access to the news headlines from the real world, and it speaks of the children in the digital world who, to the regular people, have just vanished. It has quite a lot of impact, and it was completely unexpected as other games don't cover the perspective of normies. The optimization was really well done. It sits at a consistent 30 frames per second for about 99% of the game. I noticed drops to 20 during 2 sequences, and that was it. In conclusion, Digitize was the follow-up to Digimon World that I always wanted. It's not perfect by any means, but it expands and refines the design of the first game, and that's what a good sequel does. The constant training does get a bit tedious, but it's assisted by interactivity and portability. A few minor issues with Digimon care, such as missing animations and having to unlock certain forms, but they're minor annoyances at best. The fact that the town barely changes is a significant fault. This was a major selling point of the original game, and it's completely absent in the remake. Luckily, Digimon recruitment is its own reward, and will keep you searching for these mons long into the game. While the story could be toppled in 5 to 10 hours, recruiting all of the Digimon and doing all the side content could easily triple that. It works much better as a short game, but for those who want a longer experience, it has a New Game Plus mode and a bunch of extra shit to do. Whether you're a fan of Digimon or not, I cannot recommend Redigitize enough. Even with all the issues, it's still a genuinely unique experience that you'll have trouble finding anywhere else. As always, I've been Krampus, you've been naughty, and I'll see you at Christmas time.